Green Bay hustle, grind it up. Hit the field, we don't bluff. Touchdown dances, feel the love. Jordan's got that MVP stuff. It's time for Ohio. Let's go. Packers bringing that show. It's time for you know who. Wanna go, gonna glow.
Aloha, and welcome back to another episode of the Hana Packers Edition podcast, the podcast where I again want to strangle my internet provider, and Joe is sitting here patiently waiting. The Packers.
Actually, I'm just sitting here playing a game with the Black Friday deals. It was for PlayStation. I got that Jedi Survivor for like $25. So
Oh, nice. I played the first one, so Cal, right?
yeah, I played the first one too. I bought that one, but I kind of held off on buying this one just because of price. But now it's down, so that's what I'm on now.
Good deals. But yeah, while Joe continues to be productive, I've been jumping up and down about my stupid internet. But here we are before it cuts out again. Again, the Packers delivered a happy holiday season opener for us as they beat the Dolphins 30-17 in a game where the final score didn't really reflect how these two teams played. The Packers really took the Dolphins out behind the woodshed and for the most of the game and kind of just coasted to the finish line the whole second half. So, Joe, like I said, face value, how are you feeling about this game overall?
Overall, this was probably, I know, and we'll get into it a little bit more with our different segments, but I know stat-wise it doesn't look great from some perspectives, but overall this had to be one of the most complete games that they've played all season.
Yeah, I agree. It honestly was about as when say complimentary football and all that kind of stuff. This was one of their best ones of the season. Kind of starting from the very beginning, the Keyshawn Nixon gets a good return on the opening kick, and the Packers go 3 and out, but then they recover a muffed punt and score a touchdown a few plays later. So it was honestly, that was kind of a microcosm for the whole game, but Packers get out of this one mostly healthy. We're still waiting to hear an update on Corey Ballantyne. It wasn't great seeing how his knee hyperextended when he hit the ground on that opening kickoff, but other than that, it looks like the team really made it out of this one relatively healthy. It seems like some of the guys who came into the game with question marks, mainly Josh Myers and Isaiah McDuffie, made it through without any further or exacerbation of their injuries. And I don't believe outside of Ballantyne we saw any others. And so overall, you just got to be happy. You know, we said it. Green Bay's at the point where once again, the the teams playing the two division opponents they're chasing have just decided they're not going to try to win games against those two teams. So Green Bay's just got to keep pace, and they did that on Thanksgiving, and they set themselves up for a game that'll matter on this coming Thursday against the Lions. So Joe, let's just flow into our fresh takes while my internet decides to hum freshly. So Joe,
Fresh cheese.
yes. What was fresh on your mind from this game?
Let's go with the obvious one, the pass rush. This pass rush was like almost unstoppable during that game. I think they've had, what was it? It was 2, 4, 5 sacks, and that was almost the same total as the team as a whole, pretty much it feels like. So yeah, this pass rush was there. It looks like they finally simplified things. Just do what you know best and get after the quarterback, and that's what they did for the most part. Van Ness had a sack, Quay had a sack, Kingsley had a sack, Brenton Cox had a sack, Clark had a sack. I was trying to look for QB hits. Rashawn had a QB hit. Robert Rochelle. That looks like about it. But they just seem to be getting after him, after Tua, quite a bit. So, I kind of skeeted it during the game. It looks like we finally have a pass rush, and like I said, it looks like they finally just simplified it and said, "Okay, you guys are good at bull rushing. You guys are going to bull rush. You guys are good at speed rushing. We're going to let you speed rush." So, yeah, that's definitely a fresh for this game.
Absolutely. And I know there were times in the second half where it seemed like Tua had time to make throws and stuff like that. But I mean, you look at the stats, and it was lopsided at halftime when the score was 24-13. Green Bay was winning the yardage by something like 213 to 121 at the time. And so, like you said, Joe, the end game stats are crooked. But the reality is, while this game was truly in the balance, Green Bay just dominated overall. They just dominated the overall game. And yeah, it's not great that Miami got 260 yards in the second half, but you're playing the clock at that point as the Packers. I know there was some consternation of whether they should have gone for it on fourth down at one point to try and push it to a 4 touchdown game. But in all honesty, I had no real problem with LaFleur just playing the score in the second half. And the defense, like you said, the defense was a big reason they got there in the first half. That pass rush showed up. No, the Dolphins' O line isn't great by any real measure, but just like we said about that Tennessee game earlier in the season, these are the matchups you want to see this D line take advantage of, and they did that against Tennessee. They didn't really against Chicago, but we kind of not explained away, but explained why. That's understandable because of the just totally revamped game plan that Chicago came into that game with. And then you look at this game where we said you needed to get pressure because our secondary is a little compromised against this Dolphins receiver core, and they did, like you said, and they, and not just 5 sacks, but 5 different guys got sacks today, and I think Rashawn also had like 5 pressures. There was another sack that was taken away by one of, I'm sure, what'll be of our moldy or one of our not great takes from the game, but yeah, it was great to see that front come alive and to kind of build off of that. It was great that Lucas and Quay both continued to have games that showed that they could be potentially on an upward, not just slightly upward, a very upward trajectory from where they've been most of the season. Lucas had another sack, not as explosive as the one as he had against San Fran, where he created the forced fumble, but still important. Where he beats Teron Armstead into the backfield, sheds a chip block, and brings Tua down. And then Quay's sack is, I think, one of the more impressive plays he's made as a Packer. It was the fourth down, the fourth and goal that turned the Dolphins over on downs. And what I thought was impressive about the play is Quay didn't start the play rushing the passer. He actually he's manned or zone man. His responsibility is Anchan, the running back. But the moment he reads that Anchan is staying in to block after the run fake, Quay shoots the A gap and just slices through the O line and brings Tua down. And just like last week against San Fran, it was just more aggressive play. There were a few things here and there where maybe he, took a slightly off angle or could have been a step earlier in coverage. But I think overall, he was a lot more forceful and aggressive in the run game and in pass coverage. He had a couple moments where, he was right there and helped take away, Tua's initial read, and his size and space just allows them to, plug holes in the middle of the field when he's playing aggressively. And LaFleur and Quay addressed it directly. He said, like, there's a couple things that, we had to discuss. He's talking about him, Halfley, and he said he feels the most comfortable in this scheme in terms of what the team wants to do. And it basically, if you read between the lines and what he said, what LaFleur said, it sounds like Quay was trying to play perfectly when, and LaFleur's, the way that he and LaFleur led on is like, all they care about is that he just goes and gives them 1,000% effort and they'll live with whatever outcome that gives them. So really good to see from him. Really good to see, the two of us, we've said that, Lucas is building this season. There's the scheme change. There's a lot that he had to deal with this year, but we've both noted that he's had moments this season where you're kind of like, okay, like he had a nice rush here, a nice rush there. It's nice to see these past couple of weeks that those things are paying off, that you're seeing the stats that matter come into effect. So just really good for both of them. Something that, they both need. And, it's good to see their efforts rewarded.
For sure. And you said it. We've been talking about it all year where the normal progression for a rookie and draft and develop is first year you're learning to play football all over again because the NFL is different than NCAA. The second year is where you're going to be in your sophomore slumpish type thing where you're still kind of building, but you're going to have your moments where you look like you're putting it together. And your third year is where you definitely put everything together and you're either bust or boomer bust is pretty much the way it goes with it. And Lucas is really looking like he's starting to blossom. I was just kind of looking at some of his things. He's still only playing 39% of the snaps this year on defense, which is up considerable from last year, but it's still not a ton of snaps. So, just looking at it in 12 games this year, he's played 298 snaps on defense. Last year in 17 games, he played 365. So, there I think you're starting to see the more snaps he's able to get out there, the more productive he's being on the field. And that's what you're wanting to see. And that's why I've always had the big fight with people who want to throw the whole, oh, well, look what Will McDonald's doing with the Jets. Yeah, but he's playing a shit ton more snaps than Lucas is with the Packers right now because he was forced in that position because the Jets had nobody else to put in that position. The Packers are slow burning this build with him. And the same kind of thing can go with Quay. I know Quay's in his third year right now, but like you said, and I even said it early on, I think he's overthinking things because he's got the green dot. He's having to process things a little bit more than what he was probably having to do in college. So you got to give him a little bit of time with that. I know you can't continue to use this too much, but it is his first year in a different system after being in the previous system for 2 straight years. So maybe it's starting to turn around. I mean, look at last year. It took him, the first half of the season to learn things. And then the second half of the season, he started looking better. Same thing with Lucas. So, you got to give him a little bit of time because coaching change and scheme change. But now that they've had a little bit of patience with it, they are looking better with things. So, and we've said it a lot too, where they're using Edge Cooper in the spot that we hoped that they would do with Quay. He's the freakish athlete where you just say, you're going to play with your hair on fire, just find the ball, hit the guy. Don't worry about this, don't worry about that. Well, that's what they are doing with the Edge, but they can't do that with Quay because Quay's got the previous responsibilities. Well, now it looks like, Halfley is just saying, all right, we're going to send you this, we're going to have you do this. And it looks like it's doing better for him. So, I'm looking forward to see what they do next week.
Yeah, big week for Quaid next week because the Lions do, just like the Niners did, and realistically, how the Packers do in practice when these two sides face, when the first team faces the first team. A lot of eye candy, a lot of disguise, and all that kind of stuff. So the big thing with a player like Quay and for Cooper as well is like you've just gotta you're gonna make some mistakes and you've just gotta win more than you lose kind of thing and stuff like that. That's the kind of thing you get with these sort of boomer bust quarterbacks or linebackers. So we're seeing it pay dividends. Like I said, Quay hasn't been perfect, but at least his positive plays are louder and they're the talk more than the like, oh, did he go the wrong way or did he sit too long on this play or whatever. You're seeing less of the latter, and the more, like I said, if he just plays at with his gas pedal down, he, even if he hits the wrong hole or he goes the wrong way, if he does it with if he plays up his athletic profile, a 6'4", 240 guy is going to make offenses go, oh shit. Like if he just shoots a gap and penetrates the backfield, and like as much as it might be not be the quote unquote right spot, it's that whole thing with, like, people were complaining, so there were like football writers that are like, Aaron Donald is screwing up the Rams defense because he gets too much penetration. And it's like, like, that's the stupidest thing ever. And not saying that Quay is the level of player that Aaron Donald is, but it's the same concept where it's like, and similar, like I said, same thing with Edge, where it's like you just want those two to create havoc. And yes, they might miss a few plays because they run the wrong way or hit the wrong gap or something, but it's like, but if you just are continuously being a pain in the offense's backside, you're going to create more problems for them than you do for your own team. And we're hopefully this is the sign that this is the jumping off point for Quay in that positive direction. But anything else that stood out is extra fresh for you, Joe?
Well, I did mine. What's yours for fresh?
Okay, so I kind of piggybacked off of you a little bit. My fresh is just going to be, we got back to back good Love games, and he didn't really have a play that you're kind of like, oh, like that was dangerous or anything. The only one I can think of is one where, like, he had the throw to the sideline where it might have been like a few inches upfield more than he wanted it to, and if the corner had like really, he might have been able to step into it and like tip the ball, or maybe if he was really aggressive, like intercepted. But it would have been more of like a gamble by the DB than like a bad throw by Love. I thought overall this was one of his cleanest games. I think he played the score a little bit too, but overall, I just really liked how Love played today. You saw, one of the things you and I talked about in the preview show was, forced Tua to throw in that intermediate range because his arm is not good, especially in conditions, fitting the ball into that 12 to 18-yard window where he's got to get it over a linebacker or some kind of first wave defender and into his receiver before like the DB in back of him could get to it. Like you saw too, like that was why they turned it over on downs right before the half, and the Packers were able to go score the field goal. You saw it on a few other occasions where they ended up having to punt afterward. The Packers almost had a couple interceptions off of plays like that. Whereas Love was able to just put his feet in the ground and just drive the ball, to all parts of the field. And really, if you want to nitpick, the biggest nitpick you can have is like that play at the end of the game that should have drawn a just blatant DPI flag on whatever DP was covering Watson. If he throws that where it should be, which is like a couple yards further, that's a walk-in touchdown for Watson if he catches it. So like I said, it was to that point where that was the quote unquote negative play for Love in Thursday's game. So you just like to see that as well, that he's trending in a positive direction with his play, because we said if he can just play smart, clean football, that's going to elevate this offense. And 2 weeks in a row, you're seeing it trend in that direction for the Packers, and that just bodes really well, not just for next week's game in Detroit, but really the rest of this season, because that was always going to be what was going to take the Packers to where they want to go. It was, improvement on defense, but it was on this offense to to be comfortably putting up 28, 31 points a game. And if Love is playing better, it looks like they're trending in that direction. I think you're muted.
There were some things with Love that you kind of wish would have went different, and there were a couple things that he had no control over. But overall, yeah, he had another clean game. Like I said, there were a couple passes that probably could end up being intercepted, but whether they were dropped or they you know batted down or whatever. So yeah, you can't complain overly too much with what he did that game. He did what he needed to do, and he went out, and I mean he had a good stat line, 21 and 28 for 274, a long of 49, and his rating was 129.2. So yeah, you can't complain too much about it. And he got his turkey leg.
He got two, one for this year and one for last year.
Well, technically, he got a whole damn turkey.
Yeah, I know there was a lot of there was a lot of legs on that turkey because it was a turducken. But yeah,
And it's pretty sad that they had to have Leroy go out and cook the whole damn meal for him.
I did enjoy the whole like, what happens if they had lost? Does Leroy just sneak a leg to Jordan in the back kind of thing or whatever? But I'm glad we didn't have to answer that question. So um, really good to see. And anything else for you in the fresh? Like I said, it was kind of a there was an element of this where it was a kind of ho hum game, like just the whole team just kind of hummed along in this one.
Well, I'm going to. There's two more that I can think of, and one's kind of cheating, and one is another obvious one. Uh, I think I'm going to go with the cheat one first, in case you're thinking of the other one that I am too. And the cheat one is, stacking onto the defensive side of the ball. This is 2 weeks in a row that the defense has held the rushing game under like 40 yards.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to pull it back up here because my fidget is going on, so I keep scrolling up and down and bypassing everything.
So yeah, the
But
Dolphins had 39 rush yards on 14 attempts.
right, and I think last week the 49ers only had 44 total yards rushing or something like that.
Something like that.
And Mostert had 19, A-Chain had 14, and Tua had 6. So this is 2 weeks in a row that they've put together sub 50 yard rushers, defended against these guys. And what was the big concern going into last week? McCaffrey. What was the big concern going into this week? A-Chain. So, for them to come out with what they did, it just, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go in more of it because of the fact that we've already covered a lot of it. But just the way that they're stacking the successes it gives me a lot of hope for next week.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Niners are probably a little closer to, the style of running team that the Lions are, where it's a more, it's a more physical brand, whereas the Dolphins they're kind of more of like a boomer bust kind of run game where it's like they'll they'll gain like a 1 or 2 yards here and there, and then they'll hit you for like a 30-yarder kind of thing and stuff, and it just overall brings the GPA up, kind of, it brings the overall rush per carry average up. And what's it called? Jason Garrett kind of threw some shade at the Dolphins later in the game, where he's like, they're talented, but they're not a physical team, and you're seeing that deficiency in toughness and physicality really bite the Dolphins, throughout this game. And I do think that it just kind of like you're saying, it bodes well for the Packers because the Lions kind of have both guys, because they have Montgomery, who's gonna be the physical runner, and then they have Gibbs, who's kind of like an HN or HA, I forget how to pronounce his last name, where he's the guy who's gonna try and increase your defense. So it's good that obviously you got to prepare for both in 1 week, but it's nice to see that the past 2 weeks they've dealt with both styles of rushing attacks, and they've really handled either of them pretty well. So, like you said, bodes well moving forward. And then for my other fresh point, I thought the special teams had a solid day. So, like we said, Nixon had the big return to open the game. They didn't force the fumble on the punt, but Rochelle and Melton both just destroyed their blockers and were both in position to recover that muffed punt. And then other than that, Miami didn't really do anything with with their return game on either kickoffs or punts. And Whelan, the Celtic Cannon, he had okay, so like the super nerdy punting stats will give him like a 75%. He had 3 punts inside the 20 and then 1 touchback. But being totally honest, like punting in the conditions, his punt, it's not like it sailed through the end zone. It like bounced in kind of one. So that's kind of it. It is what it is. And, sometimes the oblong ball bounces your way and sometimes it doesn't. But Whelan continues to be an absolute weapon for the Packers. And then McManus, 3 for 3 in field goals, 3 for 3 in extra points. Just a good, clean day of operations in that sense. So overall, a good day at the office, and please keep it going that way, Bisaccia.
Right. Uh, I'm gonna have to see if I can find a video. There's a guy I think either on YouTube or TikTok that is like a punter guru, and he like breaks down punters. And I'm kind of interested in seeing this because I swear there was a video I watched of him, and I can't remember who the punter was that he was talking about, but he found a new way to punt where somehow it knuckles the punt as it's coming down for the returner. And the reason I'm talking about that, and I know the conditions weren't great or whatever, but that punt did something weird.
It shifted a foot the last like I know what you're talking about, because the returner looked like he was settled under it, and then you can tell when it dropped from from the returner's vantage point, when it dropped from about the top of the bowl down to like right above him, you could tell that ball shifted to his right like a full yard. Because then that's one of those where like I said, I haven't returned a punt in a game since like Pop Warner, but that's one of those, like, if you think you've set under that thing and it starts to shift like that, just get away from it, because nothing good is gonna happen. It's kind of similar to what I was joking about when in the Vikings game when Addison like just shouldn't have tried to return that one punt and then he ended up like muffing it over his head kind of thing. This was a similar one where it was like, you're past the point of no return, just bail and like make sure the thing doesn't bounce up and hit you kind of thing. But yeah, it like you said, it's hard to say if it was definitely the Celtic Cannon who did it or if it was the wind or conditions, but that thing knuckled out a full like couple feet to the right on the returner, and it made really all the difference in what was, would have been a fair catch and a muff.
Right. And the reason I mention it I wonder if he's putting a weird knuckle on it is because, like you mentioned, the Addison one, and then there's been a couple others this year that just seem to the returner can't get comfortable settling on it. So it makes me wonder if he's able to do some kind of weird knuckle to it. And like I said, I'll have to go through and see if I can't find that guy and see if he's done a breakdown on Dan Whelan's the Celtic Cannons kicking, because if he's figured out how to put some kind of weird knuckle on it, this guy has become. It's weird to have to talk about how your favorite player on a team is a punter.
Oh, just it's refreshing to have like guys you can count on that phase of the field. So, anything else that you wanted to put in the fresh pile?
Well, you did one that I wasn't surprised. I wasn't ready for, because the other one that I thought was obvious was Josh Jacobs. And
Hmm.
yeah, I know when you look at your rushing yards, it's not going to look like 19 attempts, 43 yards. But then you add into that, he added 74 yards receiving, and this guy can move. I mean, he's a bigger back. He is, I mean, he's not huge. He's not like a Derrick Henry or a Jerome Bettis or something, but he's still 5'2", 223. But he moves like Aaron Jones would move. I mean, he's shiftier than shifty. He can cut on a dime, and and he loves contact. We saw that in the Bears game, where he motioned for the guy to actually hit him. This one, he juked the guy out of his friggin' cleats, and it's just this. He's been such a pickup, and I know there's been a strong resurgence of these running backs, and I know the teams that they left have to be kicking themselves, but I also have to wonder if the resurgence is because they are on a different team.
They're all three of those guys are in way better situations than they were on the teams that they left, because all three of them, Saquon, Derrick Henry, and Jacobs. You look at the Giants, the Titans, and the Raiders all have maybe average at best O lines to subpar O line situations, and then you compound that with their passing game situations, and they range from meh to blah. So, and in Jacob's situation, it's like his receptions can all be, they're checkdowns, but like instead of being like the quarterback can't throw it to a guy down the field, like he just physically can't complete a pass past 15 yards, or the receivers aren't good enough. It's actually like he's catching the ball in a complete void because the coverage has gone back with the receivers, and so that juke that he puts on the guys because that linebacker is coming from depth, and he's like, okay, like this, Jacobs has a head of steam. I've got to meet him, match physicality, and meet him when we make contact. And it Jacobs definitely put a little extra mustard on that juke move, but any sort of fake is like that guy's like, all right, contact is coming in 3, 2, what? Uh-oh. And Jacobs is gone, and he ends up looking like, like he tried to tackle the Holy Ghost or something. So, and like you said, Jacobs didn't have the rushing success. He muscled those 43 yards out, but I do think he set the table for Reed's 23-yard on run on the jet sweep. Emmanuel Wilson's 2 carries for 20 yards, and then even Brooks, like it. You hear that cliche all the time that it's like that bell cow back who's just pounding and pounding and pounding on a defense, and then everyone gears up for the physicality, and it's that right hook, right hook, right hook, and then whether it's Wilson or it's Brooks or Reed with the jet sweep, it's like that that left-handed cross comes, and you're like, oh shit, like I'm not ready for that. And it's cliche, but that's really what's happening to these defenses. Is it's like, oh, like wait, something different. And so Jacobs is truly setting the table for everyone else in that regard. But yeah, I agree. He definitely was on the fresh list as well, and he deserves to be recognized because, like you said, this is one of those that, like, if you're talking to someone who only reads the box score, they're like, like, but sure, he caught the ball, but he didn't rush it well, so he's a running back, whatever kind of thing. So good for Jacobs to get his due in that regard. And yeah, just like I said, it's just another way to show like this was just kind of a ho hum win for the Packers, where everyone, like, there wasn't one like totally standout performance. Everyone kind of just did what they're supposed to do. The offense, was aggressive. Like they didn't just like they still dictated what they took from the defense, but like they spread the ball around, and everyone kind of just got what they got. So it was a good game for the offense all around.
And then you add in Tucker Craft with that, because I think
Yeah.
this was another big game for him. 6 catches, 78 yards, and unfortunately he didn't get his weekly touchdown, but we'll take his contributions. So
Yep. All right, but let's move it in. Stale.
What's this stale shit?
What you got? What's bugging you this week?
okay, so I'm gonna put it as a stale just because he kind of redeemed himself later on in the game. But Dontavian Wicks, that pass that he dropped was an egregious drop. It hit him right in the arms. He was practically wide open. Who knows how long he would have been running after catching it. But I mean, it was right there. It hit him in the elbow. I I got to go with that
Luckily,
as a stale.
Watson was on Johnny on the spot to break that thing up, because that was a pick waiting to happen right there. So yeah, I agree. It's like you said, Watson did. He had a couple kind of important catches later in the game, but that one was going to be a solid one. And I see people ready to like write off why Dobbs, like, oh, they look at all the success they had without him, but that play, you had the third down to Reed in the second half, where it's kind of like, yeah, that's probably Dobbs making that catch and stuff. And it just shows like who's settled into their role, and like you said, like you can see the talent with Wicks, but he's got to catch the ball. You can't, like you said, Jordan couldn't have handed him that ball any better than he threw it on that play.
Yeah, and I mean that's basically schoolyard play where he's right there coming across the middle with nobody coming at him, and it, it yeah, it was not, it should not have been a drop. And like you said, Watson made a hell of a play to keep it from being an interception. It sucks that the defender kind of got hurt on that play just because of how
Yeah,
physical Watson got with that. But yeah, and like I said, that's the only thing that's keeping it stale is that he did go on for another 4 catches for 30 yards on 5 targets. So yeah, had that been his lone attempt, he would definitely be a moldy this week.
yeah. So gotta clean that up if you're Wicks, and we know he has the talent too. So just gotta. Hopefully though, Dobbs is back this week. Not to like just be like, oh, so we don't deal with Wicks, but just so that everyone's kind of in the roles that fit them best and stuff. But and
I
then
think they said he was practicing this week. I think LaFleur said in his presser that he was still in the protocol, but he was
yeah, there was
doing the
one of those.
walkthrough or whatever.
Yeah, it was one of those where he kind of the way he let on, it was like if it was a Sunday game, he probably makes it through kind of thing. But because it was a short week, there was almost no way for him to make it kind of thing. So it's promising, but hopefully we'll see Dobbs out there just because of what he, like I said, not to pile on Wicks, but just because of what, like I said, even that other play later in the where Reed is on the inside slant and it's nothing Reed does wrong on that play. It's just that he's a smaller, Dobbs is 3 inches taller and just stockier than Reed. So he just naturally boxes defenders out better. So, like I said, different roles, different guys. And then my stale for the week, I really battled with which way to go on this one. And it kind of is similar to Wix, where because of the production you got on the other side of it, I'm like, okay, I understand. But it's lining up offsides so often in this game. Like I said, it cost Rashawn at least half a sack. I don't think he would have been awarded a full sack on that play, but he was offside. You had Enigbari lining up offside. You had I forget who else. Oh, Slayton jumping offside on the field goal. Luckily, it ended up just being another field goal in that drive. But it was a 48-yarder in the conditions, and maybe Miami, maybe they pooch it kind of thing and stuff. So it costs you like 20 yards of field position there. So you know, we kind of the two of us we've kind of talked about whether like they're pushing the envelope on purpose to be like, let's see, how close we can get. The closer we are to the line of scrimmage, the closer you are to making a play, and that whole mentality. But you heard LaFleur after the game. He's kind of like, all right, let's stop with the bullshit. Let's clean. We got to clean this up because we gave away so many plays, so many yards on that, in those kind of situations. So yeah, it's luckily this week it was more of an annoying thing, but it's one of those ones where it's like, okay, like the Dolphins, they were winners of 5 or 6 and all that kind of stuff, but you're about to face the best team in your conference, 1 or 1A, depending on how you feel against the Lions, against versus the Eagles, and you just can't be giving up freebies. You can't be negating big plays on defense because someone was just lined up like an idiot and stuff. You can hear LaFleur, like I said, it might have been something where Halfley and his guys were like, let's see if we can push the envelope, but I get the feeling that LaFleur is gonna kind of just bang on the defensive meeting room and be like, no more of that bullshit. Like, line up normal. Let's just play clean again, guys.
Yeah, and we've, like you said, we've talked about it over and over and over again that we think they're trying to cheat the system, but when you're cheating the system, you've got to at least be aware of where you're at. It's not that hard to realize where the fucking ball's at when you're lining up on the line. So yeah, there's not much more I can add to that because we've talked about it constantly, and it is what it is. It's something that they got to fix.
Yeah, if it goes another week, it's definitely going in the moldy. But like I said, it's like it almost is this week, but they had all the production they did from the front, and it's hard to quantify. Like, is it because they're towing the line, or is it just they're just playing better? And if it is the latter, it's like, okay, then fine, like stop towing the line. Like, if you're just doing better, you don't need to do that anymore. So yeah, the just tighten the screws a little bit, you guys.
So I've got one, but it's kind of a leaner, just because I understand the whole situation, if that's what you want to call it. And I understand there's not much they could have done about it, but I still think it's a solid stale take, and that's allowing 365 passing yards. I know what you're going to say. Well, it was junk yardage as they were trying to come back. I get that, but with what the defense was doing for the majority of the game, you thought they would have been able to defend that a lot better. And I know it didn't really hurt them in the long run. The Packers still beat them by a good 13 points, so it wasn't that devastating. But when you're talking about complete games, you would love to see a complete defensive shutdown. You know, don't allow enough, all of these passing yards. Don't allow all these rushing yards. Just take them completely out of the game, because you're going to need to do that against teams like Detroit, Minnesota, Seattle. You're just going to have to take them all. Who else do we got coming up? Do we got Washington coming up?
No, it's Detroit, Seattle, Saints, and then
Saints.
Minnesota and Bears. I think that's the order.
Yeah, Detroit, Seattle, Saints, Vikings, Bears. So you're at least going to have to do that with Detroit and Minnesota. Seattle is Seattle, and it's hard to gauge them right now. But it needs to be one of those where you just completely shut down a team to give yourself a boost. To just fucking say, all right, this is the type of team we can be. So, like I said, I understand all the things that can be come back at me, but I would love to see where not only are we shutting down the run, but we're shutting down the pass too. And it's not because they were playing badly. I mean, I love the fact that Halfley has to be an OPE listener, because if you look at uh the snaps, it finally started evening out this game. And he did what I said to do a couple weeks ago. You can't just rely on, two or three guys and call it good. You've got to have a solid rotation going on. So when you look at it, uh let's see here. Carrington played 49% of the snaps. Stokes played 51% of the snaps. Of course, you had Keyshawn playing 100% of the snaps. But and McKinney played 100% of the snaps. Bullard was at 93, and where's Evan? Evan was at 73%. So they were rotating in the secondary pretty good, and I think that's great. And like I said, I don't think they were playing that bad. I thought Stokes played very well for the most part. Nixon played very well for the most part. Valentine played very well for the most part. It just, and again, I know it's all junk time as they're trying to make a comeback, but that's still a lot of yards through the air to give up.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, on one hand, the two so like the I didn't like how it's 7 plays, but I didn't like that the Dolphins final touchdown drive only took 2 minutes. But the first touchdown drive, it took them 5 minutes, so you're at least bleeding clock. And then the one that ends on downs, that took 6 minutes. But I agree with you, it would be nice to get off the field at some point, kind of thing. Like, there, it's not like, you are getting some third and mediums to third and longs. It's like it would be nice to get off at, like to shut one of those drives down at some point. So I agree with you. Like while you are playing the scoreboard and stuff, you do want to see them still get stops in the second half. Like make it, like I said, let the scoreboard kind of reflect how the game went. Like don't let it be, even where it is a 13-point win, let it still look like a 3-score win. Let it still, let it still be a 3-score win. Don't, and the difference between a 17 and a 21, not like a 13 and a 20-point win and stuff. So I agree. Like it could be a little better, and it's those are the nits we are picking this week. But like you said, we say it with the forward view of like looking at what's ahead for the team.
Right, because the guys that gave up the guys that had the yardage for the Dolphins are starting tight end Jonnu Smith, starting receiver Tyreek Hill, starting receiver Jalen Waddle. Hill had 83, Jonnu had 113, Jalen had 53. So that's, against the Lions, what would that be? That would be Laporta, Amon-Ra,
And
and what,
Williams,
Jameson?
yeah, I think so.
So, that you got to be mindful of that going forward.
Yep. All right. And anything for Moldy this week?
It's a moldy cheese.
Yes, I do have one major moldy thing. You kind of brought it up a little bit earlier, but I'm going to do it as a whole. And I know it didn't hurt the Packers that much, but what is it? And we do this every week, it seems like, these officiating crews. What is going on? 17 total penalties between the Dolphins and the Packers this week. And they missed the most egregious call, like you said, against Watson. That was clear pass interference. They've been calling everything else during the game, but at that point, we're not going to call this one.
Yeah, someone had a steakhouse reservation to keep because, like, it was such a like you said, they were calling everything under the sun up to that point, and then it's just like, nah, we're not gonna call that one. So that was sort of like one of those. What are we looking at, guys? I know. I do think, and you could kind of see LaFleur say it like it was almost like what wasn't good enough on that one. Like he mouthed it with a little bit more colorful language. Yeah, he's basically saying like you've called everything else. Like why didn't that garner a flag there? So I agree. Like it's just so weird how these crews have functioned all season, and just go figure, right? At this point, I don't
Well,
have to climb on.
the only thing I can think of is, and it's kind of a conspiracy theory a little bit, but I've also said it about baseball. I'm wondering if these reffing and umpiring crews are kind of rebelling because there is a lot of automation coming into their job. And I'm wondering if they're saying, well, if that's how you want to do it, then we're just going to do this. And if that's how you want to do it, then we're just going to do this. Because you see it a lot in baseball and you see it a lot in football right now where it's continuous. They're going to call all these plays, but none of them can be reviewed. So it's kind of like, na 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 na. You can't review this. We're going to call it against you, type of thing.
Yeah, so go figure. It's one of those, but I really don't have anything too moldy for this one. Like I said, not much to complain about in this game anyway. Nothing to be super critical of. Just a good complimentary football game from the Packers, but that's all you got for today. We can put a nice bow on this one and just go
The
on
only
into the week.
thing I want to kind of mention is what was with the Dolphins being as chippy as they were.
I have no idea. That's a good question. Yeah, that came. It's not like one of those preseason games where you're practicing together. It really just like on the second drive of the game, they were trying to like start some shit and stuff, and I don't understand where that came from. Yeah, like it's not like there's any history. We don't play these guys very often. None of these guys really came from NFC teams and stuff. So yeah, I'm at a loss for words there.
So I guess that would be a moldy for me, but I don't get where the chippiness came from or the animosity. And it was really before the Packers were even starting to dominate the game. And I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't either. But like I said, the most important thing is, and like you said, with how this game, you kind of almost wanted it to just be over at halftime because you're like, okay, like only bad things can happen here for the Packers. Like, they're, just let this game end and let's go to next week into the Detroit game. And like I said, luckily, it seems like they made it out of there without any more like massive injuries. Like I said, we just hope Valentine is okay. And and yeah, we will just like I said, we will just put our focus on Detroit, as McCarthy would kind of say, as one of his old cliches, we're on to Detroit. So thank you for joining us. We hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Please check out our website, ohanapackers.org. Please support the channel, buy merch, get our different help out our different causes, troop support, cancer awareness. Those drives are still going on. Please follow the podcast on your social media at Ohana_Packers on Twitter, at Ohana Packers Edition on Instagram, Facebook, just Ohana Packers Edition. Search that. Please follow the podcast on your favorite podcasting apps. Give us a like and a subscribe if you're enjoying what you're hearing. And positive or negative comments, we want to hear them all. So we're creating the content you're looking for. The Packers are 9-3. They look to score a big division win next week against the Lions. We'll have our opponent preview for you that'll come out the day of the game. But for Iowa Joe, I might go Pack Go and Aloha.
Green Bay hustle, grind it up. Hit the field, we don't bluff. Touchdown dances, feel the love. Jordan's got that MVP stuff. It's time for OPE. Let's go. Packers bringing that show. It's time for OU.